time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, trade played an important role in society. Not only he, but his companions, ridwanullahi alayhim, were engaged in trade. Not local trade, but international trade. Every year, with the changing of the seasons, caravans would go out across the desert, and business would be transacted over long distances. And they did very well for themselves. In fact, they did so well that the people they came in contact with in foreign lands, on the islands of Ceylon, for example, out in India, in Malaysia, in the Philippines, as far as China, as far west as Maghreb, Al-Aqsa, to Spain. Muslim traders spread out all over the world and did business ethically and in a good way, such that people became impressed with them and with their akhlaq, their character, their deen. And they converted in huge numbers to Islam. Islam was not spread by the sword, it was spread by our merchants, it was spread by our akhlaq, it was spread by our values. And we can continue to carry that message today. It's really quite a simple thing. So the underlying financial principles led or guided our business people, our traders over the centuries. It also guided our leaders, our political leaders, our military leaders, our public leaders in developing public works, building public buildings, establishing institutions in our cities and towns, building dams and canals and whatever needed to be done. All of this was done for centuries without the help of any bank, without the help of any money lenders. This was done through cooperative efforts, through financing that took place as a result of partnerships, where people with expertise joined with people with capital and worked together for a common goal. Fortunately, at the time, as our people spread out across the world, and as the world, they encountered new situations, and every time they encountered a new situation, these were followed by the fuqaha, by our jurists, and so our jurists over the centuries, just like our traders, developed a huge corpus of literature, fatawa, nawazil, furu', fiqhiyya. All of these things came about as a result of developments in the world. Our Sharia has within it an inbuilt dynamic, which is called al-ijtihad. And by means of this inner dynamic, ijtihad, our fiqh kept up with the developments in the world. And that continues to be the case today. We have been blessed, obviously, with the revelation, al-wahy al-matlub, in the form of the Quran, and al-wahy ghayr al-matlub, in the form of the ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the example of his Sahaba and those who came after. So we have this rich heritage from which to draw when we consider new situations, in the same way that the fuqaha of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th centuries drew from the previous legal literature. We too can do the same. And that's pretty much what's taking place today in modern Islamic finance. There was a period in our history, however, when colonialist powers from Europe encroached on our territory, and as a reason, for purely economic reasons again, They saw an opportunity to enrich themselves, and they did. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Germans, all of them sent expeditions out into the world, and especially into the Muslim world, and they established their own institutions in place of ours. Chief among those institutions were the commercial banks. The commercial banks allowed the colonialists not only to take our wealth and appropriate it for themselves, but also, by means of interest, to begin inflating it, such that every dinar or dirham that they took from our treasuries became 10 or 100 or more in theirs. And so this vicious circle of banking and blowing air into the economies of the world began at that time in a big way, because up until that time they had only their own assets. Once they went out into the world, they discovered an endless world of assets that they could conflate. And that's exactly what they did, inflate. At the present time, we have problems and we have opportunities. The problems that we face stem primarily from the way that the global economy is presently constituted. As I mentioned earlier, our concept of money is quite different, whereas the conventional concept is something that is very, very arbitrary, and one that allows the banks, the financial wizards of the world, to do their magic, to the detriment of everyone other than themselves, by the way. And even though they pay these fines, and the fines keep going up and up and up, the latest fine, I don't know if you read it in the newspapers, the latest fine paid by one of these international banks was $1.3 billion. Prior to this time, they've been paying, slap on the wrist kind of money, but now they're paying real money. But then when you consider that their balance sheet showed a profit this year of $5.5 billion, if they had to pay $1.3 billion one time to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, big deal. So you can see that we find ourselves surrounded by an ocean of interest. The Prophet ﷺ once said to his companions that a day will come when, even though you yourselves are not involved in interest, you will nonetheless smell it in the air, because it permeates every aspect of society. You'll smell it in the air. You'll smell it. And that's our situation right now. It is everywhere, even your electrical bill. Interest is all over the place. It's considered now to be, essential to any kind of modern economic activity. And so, when Islamic banks opened 20, 30 years ago, people laughed. They thought, oh, this is nonsense. How can you operate a bank without interest? Well, that brings us to the question of how did we operate for centuries without banks, without interest? How did we? And the simple answer is we operated quite well, thank you, by means of our Sharia. Anyone who does business internationally is aware of the fact that you need to have, number one, if you're going to do business internationally, number one, you need to have what is called rule of law, political stability. Those are the things that you need. You need also to be able to transfer money across distances. All of those things were provided, mashallah, by the Sharia of Islam. How? let's turn to the story of Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta was trained as a Qadi in North Africa. One day he decided he needed to go for Hajj, and he did. He went for Hajj and stayed on for a number of years. And how did he make his livelihood? Well, he was a Qadi from the Maliki school of fiqh, and so he became a Qadi in the Maliki school. Because in every city across the Islamic world in those days, you had Mahakim Sharia, you had these Sharia courts, and one for each one of the major madhab. So your court in New Delhi, or in those days it was Delhi, your Sharia court in Delhi would have a Hanafi Qadi, you would have a Maliki Qadi, a Shafi'i, a Hanbali, and so on. So when Ibn Battuta decided to leave Mecca and move on to the next place, where did he go? He went to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, Sarandib. He became there a Qadi in the Sharia courts. What about this network of Sharia courts all the way across the world? Because later on he went from Sarandib, he went to Delhi himself. There he crossed the Himalayas and went to China and lived there for years as a Qadi of the Maliki school of fiqh in China. So all across the world you have these Sharia courts. And what they established, what they effectively established was a network through which trade, international trade and business could take place in accordance with Sharia principles. So the example of Ibn Battuta shows us quite clearly what was going on in those days. And a number of studies have been written recently on exactly this phenomenon, how we had how international trade took place, essentially facilitated by means of the Sharia of Islam. Why? Because traders could go from one port to another with their cargoes and with their contracts. And if any dispute arose in any one of those ports, they could find legal redress in the Mahakim Sharia. They could go to to the Qadi and say, "This is my situation," and the trading partner could bring his case, and the matter would be straightened out. So this is how trade was facilitated in terms of transfer of money, in terms of stability. All of that was a part of the Sharia network as well. So by means of the different contracts that we developed over the centuries, we took care of those problems as well. So credit and trade, and these things were very much a part of business in those days, and there are a number of academic studies that have to do with that, though certainly not nearly enough, because people, even Muslim business people, are not aware of their history in this respect. So our problem today stems essentially from the fact that we find ourselves operating in a system that is anathema. It's inimical to our own beliefs, to our own system. It does not mesh. It, in fact, represents a danger for us and for everyone else. Nonetheless, it is what it is. We find ourselves in the midst of it. We do what we can as a result to work within it, but in accordance with our own principles. It's not enough anymore for us it's not enough, it's just not our way that we're going to play along with something that represents everything that we understand to be unacceptable. So the opportunity here, is that we now have a global system that presents us with a lot of connectivity, with opportunities for exchange on many, many different levels. And so when Muslims begin putting their heads together on questions of importance to us, we can discuss these with people all over the place. We can discuss them with our brothers and sisters across the globe. We can bring in the opinions of scholars and experts, whether they're Muslims or not, and we can work together on problems. So shortly after the Second World War, let's call it the colonial era, came pretty much to a close as Muslim country after Muslim country gained its independence. And Muslims across the world began thinking about reviving their society, their Muslim society, and especially the way they went about it was by reviving their institutions. And so we looked at our financial institutions, which had been co-opted by colonialists. We looked at our educational institutions, our legal institutions. We looked at our charitable institutions, our, you name it. The result was that people across the world, Muslims across the world, began talking to one another. And at this time, people became serious about the subject of Islamic finance. In fact, in the early days, people called it Islamic economics. Sayyid Qutb wrote a book. Sayyid Abul A'la al-Maududi wrote a book on the subject. There was an Irani scholar who wrote a book on the subject and of Islami. And people began writing about Islamic social justice, economic justice. As a result, international conferences began to be held, and scholars began thinking seriously about these subjects, but in a theoretical way at first. I mean, the 50s and the 60s were a time of reflection and looking back and attempting to recover something from the past that might be relevant for the future. But in practical terms, we weren't too far along the road until the 70s. At that time, a number of Islamic banks actually opened their doors. People got the idea that, well, we need to have our own financial system. And so, while it was impossible to reinvent the old dinar and the dinar standard, it was possible nonetheless to transact, to contract, and to do business in accordance with Islamic principles. And so a handful of traders, for example, in Dubai got together to establish the first the Dubai Islamic Bank. It opened its doors in 1975 and was followed soon after by several others, Al Baraka Bank, Faisal Islamic Banks, and a handful of others across the world. So that by the 1980s, we had 20 or 30 Islamic banks across the Muslim world. By 1990, we had probably 120 in Islamic banks with maybe 2,000 or 3,000 branches in pretty much every major country of the world. And by 2000, the industry had grown into essentially a multi-billion-dollar industry.